She wasn't supposed to find them like that. Not on a Tuesday morning. Not curled together in the mud, like the world had forgotten they existed. But when Grace Thompson saw what was lying beside that deserted highway, she knew her life was about to change forever. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gray dawn that felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Grace had walked this same route to work for 20 years. Same rhythm, same quiet routine, but nothing about this morning would ever be ordinary again. In the distance, near the edge of the tree line, something moved. At first, she thought it was debris from the night's storm. Then she saw the ribs, the matted fur, the way his body shook, not from cold, but from something deeper, exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle no one else could see. By the way, let us know in the comments, what country are you watching from, and what time is it right now? It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. The German Shepherd was massive, but he looked broken, curled around a white styrofoam box, like he was protecting something precious. Grace's heart hammered as she got closer. His eyes, those deep, weary eyes, looked up at her, with an expression she'd never forget. Not quite pleading, not quite desperate, something else entirely. What could make a dog guard something so fiercely that he'd rather collapse than walk away? Grace knelt beside him, and that's when she heard it, soft, muffled. A sound that made her stomach drop, and her hands tremble. She pulled the lid off that muddy box with fingers that could barely function, and what she found inside changed everything she thought she knew about miracles. A newborn baby girl, barely breathing, lips tinged blue, skin ice cold, but alive. The dog, this nameless, forgotten creature, had somehow pulled her from the woods, had dragged that box through the storm, through the night, to the one spot where someone might find her, had wrapped his own shivering body around her, to keep her warm when the world had given up on them both. But how did he know? How does a starving stray dog understand what it means to save a life? Grace's hands shook as she dialed 911, but her voice was steady. I found a baby, and I think he saved her. Within minutes, sirens cut through the morning silence. EMTs rushed in, wrapping the infant in heated blankets, checking vitals, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. One of them looked at the dog, then at Grace, with something like awe in his eyes. This dog kept her warm all night, he said, not really asking. Grace nodded, tears already forming. He pulled her out of the woods, got her to the road. He stayed. But that was just the beginning. Because some stories don't end with a rescue, they begin with one. The baby girl would be called Mira, meaning miracle. The dog, once nameless and forgotten, would become guardian. And Grace Thompson, who had walked to work alone for 20 years, was about to discover that sometimes the family you never expected is the one that saves you right back. What none of them knew yet was that this wasn't just about one night in a storm. This was about a bond that would be tested again and again in hospital rooms, at community events, in moments when everything they'd built together would hang in the balance. And Guardian, he wasn't done being a hero. Not even close. In the days that followed, the hospital became their second home. Mira lay in her incubator, wrapped in soft pink blankets, her tiny chest rising and falling with a rhythm that doctors called miraculous. Nurses whispered about the miracle baby, but Grace knew the real miracle was lying in a different wing of the building. Guardian was dying. The veterinarians found what they'd feared, advanced malnutrition, a dangerous respiratory infection from that night in the storm, and something else. Old injuries that spoke of a past no one wanted to imagine. His body was giving up on him, just when he'd found something worth living for. But sometimes, when you've saved a life, that life finds a way to save you back. Grace made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She filed papers to temporarily foster them both. Not forever, she told the social worker. Just until the world makes sense again. What she didn't say was that she couldn't bear the thought of them being separated. Not after what they'd been through. The first night she brought them home, something extraordinary happened. Mira stirred in her tiny crib near the living room window, fussing in that way newborns do when the world feels too big and too cold. Guardian, still weak but determined, padded over slowly. His frame was thin, but his purpose was clear. He sat beside the crib and gently rested his head on the edge. Mira calmed instantly. How does a dog understand what a baby needs when most adults don't have a clue? It became their ritual. Wherever Mira went, Guardian followed. During the day, he lay beside her crib. When she cried, he would gently lick her tiny hand until she giggled. When Grace sat with Mira in her arms, Guardian would lie at their feet like a silent, devoted shadow. Grace began to understand something profound. This wasn't just about rescue anymore. This was about belonging. Then came the morning that changed everything again. Grace was folding laundry when she heard it. A sharp squeal of pure joy. She turned, startled, to see Guardian nudging a small plush ball toward Midора's crib with his nose. It bounced gently against the rail, and Midora burst into laughter. Her very first laugh. Grace pressed a hand to her chest, tears welling. "You two," she whispered. "You're already a team." But the real test of their bond was still coming. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Guardian suddenly bolted from his spot by the crib. He sniffed at Midora, then let out a low, urgent bark. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Midora wasn't breathing. Guardian barked louder, ran to Grace's bedroom, and jumped onto the bed, yanking at her blanket with his teeth. Then barking again, faster, sharper, desperate. Grace jolted awake. Guardian, what? But she saw his eyes. Wild, frantic. She followed him, heart hammering, to the crib. Midora's face was red. Her lips were blue. In that moment, Grace realized the truth. Guardian wasn't just Midora's protector, he was her lifeline. Grace didn't hesitate. She called 911 with trembling fingers and began CPR as the dispatcher guided her through each compression, each breath. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. Later, at the hospital, a pediatrician approached Grace with a look of grave honesty. She suffered an acute allergic reaction, he said quietly. Rare, sudden, and dangerous. If you'd found her even 5 minutes later, he shook his head. She wouldn't have made it. Grace sat beside Midora's hospital bed all night, holding the baby's tiny hand in one of hers, and Guardian's paw in the other. "You did it again," she whispered to him. "You saved her again." The dog didn't move, but his eyes never left the crib. He had no words. He didn't need them. Because some bonds aren't built on training or commands. They're built on something deeper, an instinct that says, "This life matters more than my own." 1 year later, Guardian had become more than a local legend. He was proof that love could survive abandonment, that loyalty could bloom in the most broken places. The community had embraced their story, and Grace found herself at the center of something she'd never expected. Hope. The Hearts for Hope fundraiser was supposed to be their celebration. A joyful day where the community gathered to support orphan children and stray animals. Balloons floated above booths lined with baked goods and handmade crafts. At the center of it all, Guardian sat calmly beside the small stage, wearing a special red vest embroidered with white letters. Miracle Dog. Mira. Now nearly one giggled in Grace's lap, as Guardian gently licked her fingers. Families lined up to take pictures with him. Children brought treats. It was peaceful, joyful, everything their story represented. But sometimes, the greatest tests come when you least expect them. Guardian suddenly stiffened. His ears shot forward, nose lifted, sniffing the air with an alertness that made Grace's stomach tighten. In the distance, near the back entrance, a man moved awkwardly against the crowd flow. Dark clothes, hat pulled low, his eyes darting left and right as his hand clutched something inside his jacket. Guardian growled low, warning. Dangerous. What does a dog see that humans miss? What instinct kicks in when everything looks normal but feels wrong? The man reached for his inner pocket, moving toward the auction display table. Guardian didn't hesitate. He leaped over the small stage fence, barking loud, fast, relentless. The crowd turned, startled by the sudden outburst. The man flinched, his hand emerging with what appeared to be a small pistol. Guardian charged. The world seemed to slow as the shepherd intercepted the man, lunging and biting down on his forearm. The weapon clattered to the ground. Screams erupted. Parents pulled their children back. Grace grabbed Mira and ducked behind a nearby table, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might stop. In that split second, everyone realized the truth. Guardian wasn't just protecting Mira anymore. He was protecting all of them. The man tried to shake Guardian off, but the dog held firm, barking fiercely, forcing him down to the pavement. Within seconds, 2 off-duty officers who'd been attending the event ran in, weapons drawn, and subdued the suspect. Later, police confirmed the man had a history of theft and violent incidents. His intent that day remained unclear. But whatever it was, Guardian had stopped it before anyone could be hurt. The footage spread like wildfire. Local news anchors spoke with awe. Guardian, the stray who once shielded a baby in a storm, has done it again, this time protecting an entire crowd. But as cameras flashed and reporters asked their questions, all Guardian wanted was to return to Mira's side, to lie at her feet and rest. Because for him, Being a hero wasn't about headlines or recognition. It was about never letting anyone he loved face danger alone. That night, as Grace tucked Mira into her crib and Guardian settled beside them both, she finally understood what she'd been witnessing all along. This wasn't just about one dog saving one baby. This was about what happens when a soul that's been thrown away discovers it has infinite value to give. Guardian rested his graying muzzle on his paws, eyes calm but watchful. Tomorrow there would be more interviews, more attention, more people wanting to understand the magic of what they'd witnessed. But the real magic wasn't in the heroic moments. It was in the quiet ones, in the daily choice to love, to protect, to stay. The storm that had brought them together felt like a lifetime ago. What remained was something stronger than rescue, deeper than gratitude. It was family and families. Grace was learning don't just save each other once. They save each other every single day. 3 years passed like gentle seasons, each one deeper and more rooted than the last. Grace, who had once walked to work in solitude, now walked through life with purpose that surprised even her. She had officially adopted Mira on the girl's 2nd birthday, signing papers with tears in her eyes while Guardian sat loyally at her feet, as if he too understood the significance. But the real transformation wasn't in the paperwork. It was in what they built together. Grace launched the Mira and Guardian Project, a non-profit providing emergency aid and long-term support for abandoned children and stray animals. The mission was beautifully simple: give second chances to those the world had forgotten. The organization flourished beyond anything Grace had imagined. Volunteers poured in, shelters partnered with them, fundraisers sold out, because sometimes one story of love creates 1,000 more. Inside the rescue center, photographs lined the walls: Mira as a newborn, Guardian in that muddy alley, that styrofoam box, and the impossible bond that had saved 2 lives and inspired countless others. But the most treasured photo was newer. Mira at 3, arms wrapped around Guardian's neck, both of them laughing in the afternoon sunlight. The day of the Animal Bravery Honor Ceremony arrived with the kind of golden autumn light that makes everything feel blessed. Guardian stood on the small wooden stage in the town square, his coat glistening, a special medal hanging from a blue velvet ribbon around his neck. Grace approached the microphone with Mira in her arms, looking out at hundreds of faces, some familiar, some strangers drawn by their story. He wasn't trained to save lives, Grace said, her voice breaking slightly. He just did. When no one else was watching, when no one else came, he stayed. And because of that choice, that one beautiful choice, I have a daughter. Because of that, we are a family. But the most perfect moment was still coming. As the crowd rose in applause, Mira wriggled out of Grace's arms, ran to Guardian, and threw her small arms around his thick neck. "My hero puppy!" she shouted, grinning with the pure joy only children possess. The crowd laughed and clapped again, but Guardian just sat there, eyes calm, tail wagging slowly, as if he'd always known this was exactly where he belonged. Years passed, not in a rush, but like a river finding its course. On a soft spring afternoon, their backyard was filled with new sounds, joyful yelps and the patter of little paws. 3 puppies, Guardian's legacy, chased butterflies and each other beneath the wide oak tree. Guardian lay in the grass, older now, muzzle touched with silver, but his eyes still warm and watchful. Beside him, Mira, now 5, lay on her belly with a picture book, one hand gently resting on Guardian's back, the other turning pages filled with stories of brave animals and magical friendships. "You still love stories, don't you?" she whispered, smiling. Guardian huffed softly, closing his eyes in contentment, and in that moment, peaceful, complete, there was no storm, no abandoned box, no loneliness, only the quiet legacy of a soul who had given everything and received everything in return. Some hearts aren't taught how to love or protect. They're born knowing, even when no one's watching, even when the world has turned its back, because true heroes don't wear capes or carry weapons or ask for recognition. Sometimes they come with 4 legs, a loyal heart, and the courage to stay when everyone else walks away. Guardian had no name when this story began. No collar, no home, no reason to hope. But he had something more powerful than any of those things. A heart brave enough to save a baby and a soul loyal enough to protect her for a lifetime. From the cold streets to the warmest corner of a child's heart, Guardian proved that the ones the world throws away are sometimes the very ones who save it. And that love, once given freely, creates ripples that never stop spreading. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, casting dancing shadows over the family that had found each other in the storm. Guardian's breathing was slow and peaceful, Mira's voice soft as she read aloud, and Grace watching from the kitchen window with a heart full of gratitude for the morning she'd decided to take a different path home. Because sometimes the most extraordinary families are the ones nobody planned.